how many dolls and how many pencils are you personally willing to give up to make America great again?
He can have all my dolls. I'll keep the pencils.
Fair enough.
I'm more of a pen gal, so I'm not as worried about pencils.
All right. I am here to admit that our listeners can't see this, but I'm holding up 14 pencils that say they're made with 100% American cedar wood, and then at the bottom it says "Made in China." I don't know how that's exactly possible, but I'm giving up all 14 of my pencils and all of my dolls, except for one, which is the Anthony Fauci bobblehead when he threw out his first pitch at the Nationals game. You know, that dribbler that didn't quite make it to the catcher.
That's very cute.
But I'm not giving that up, no matter how fierce the trade war gets. This is Impromptu from Washington Post Opinions, a show that brings you conversations about the news we can't stop thinking about, no matter how many dolls and pencils we buy ourselves. I'm Dana Milbank, and this week we're talking about the economy and how Trump's trade war is affecting Americans. We got some mixed financial news last week. The economy shrank in the first quarter for the first time in nearly 3 years, and consumer confidence is in the toilet. But employment has been better than expected, and markets have largely recovered since Liberation Day. So what's actually happening? I have no idea. But fortunately, I've got some very smart colleagues who do.
I'm Catherine Rampell. I'm an opinion columnist at the Washington Post, mostly focusing on economics.
I'm Eduardo Porter, member of the editorial board and also a columnist here at the Post. I don't write as much about economics as Catherine, but I do a fair amount as well.
And you both know a great deal more than I do. All right. So a month ago, President Trump announced massive tariffs, then walked many of them back while raising duties on Chinese goods to 145% and threatening to slap a duty on just about anything that moves across borders, including motion pictures shot overseas. Trump has said several times now that American girls, who in his telling have between $30 and $37 apiece, will have to make do with 2, 3, or at most 4 dolls, while children who currently have 250 pencils will now be limited to 5. Now, leaving aside the question of just how many kids have $37 and 250 pencils, how will it play for him to tell Americans to get by with less while he rakes in billions of dollars from meme coins?
So I will say, I think we've learned a lot about what Donald Trump's kids got for Christmas back in the day. I think that there may be some projection here. There's this great photo shoot. I think it's from around the time when he ran for president before 2015, 2016, where you can see Barron Trump riding around in a little mini child-sized Mercedes. So I think we have a sense there. But in general,
there's a 25% tariff on that?
Depends where it was made, but probably 145% tariff if I had to guess. But setting that aside, Trump ran on making Americans richer, on bringing costs down, telling them that they're going to have lower living standards, and maybe have to start planting victory gardens so that they can sustain their own produce and whatnot. I think is probably not going to go over so well, but you never know. A lot of Trump's base is very loyal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got to think there's a lot of people out there that were just hoping for the unicorns and the rainbows, and not necessarily.
Those are still free. If it doesn't exist,
no tariff on unicorns unless they're
give them time.
Depends on where we get them. So other than the immediate impact on the unicorn and rainbow market, are Americans actually feeling these tariffs?
Well, if you look at the consumer confidence surveys, at least they're anticipating effects. Perhaps they haven't yet lost their job. Perhaps they don't look very often at their 401k, and so that hasn't freaked them out yet. But in any event, they're looking into the future and seeing a very bleak outlook right there. If you look at the lagging data, if you look at, say, the employment stats that we got last week, it does not look like a disaster yet. And the market seemed to be responding to that by, recovering all that was lost on Liberation Day. But clearly this is all contingent on Trump not doing further damage. I mean, I'm guessing that markets are kind of guessing that the tariffs will somehow go away, that he's not going to bring that first list of tariffs back. And if Trump does, in fact, insist on that, I could see the markets going down a ton. And moreover, I do think that even the tariffs that are in place now will eventually start hitting the stats from the real economy. So it will start showing up in employment in coming months.
Yeah, it's funny to me, or puzzling to me, I should say, that markets keep on reacting so positively, almost euphorically, to every time somebody in the White House says, we have a deal coming tomorrow, right? Or 200 deals at one point had already been struck with secret unnamed countries. And the markets seem to respond to that as if it's real. And it just seems like vaporware. It's a fake out. Like, I don't get it. Every time it seems like the markets have this bounce back.
Yeah.
And actually, Eduardo attributed some of the positive movement in stock markets to the backward-looking data, like the strong/normal jobs report. I think it's more about this wish casting that Trump is going to come to his senses and realize he's unilaterally destroying the economy and he'll have to pull back. And I just don't know that that's a safe bet at this point. Not only is he waging this multi-front trade war, actually a universal trade war,
Yeah.
he's also threatening the independence of the Federal Reserve, which could be very damaging to the economy, particularly to inflation numbers going forward, and wreaking all sorts of havoc in other ways. Deporting large swaths of the labor force will also cause huge problems for particular sectors, food services, agriculture, things like that. I guess I'm more bearish than everybody else who's a professional trader, so, take it with a grain of salt. But it just seems like there's still a lot of bad stuff on the horizon that somehow hasn't been priced in yet.
So it's not that Wall Street is like warming to Trump's policies. It's that they're more confident that he's walking away from his policies.
That's how I read things, but who knows, animal spirits.
I would agree absolutely with that. Markets are just hoping that he's going to take it all off.
And I'm just asking for a friend here. Would this be a good time to cash out of the market?
Oh.
I don't give financial advice. And I think the answer to that is it really depends on where you are in your life cycle and how close you are to retirement and all of that.
I'm one of those people that never looks at the 401k. I just, cross my fingers, put the pillow over my head and hope for the best,
Yeah.
That is the soundest economic advice I've heard in a long time. All right, after the break, we're going to talk about the broader implications of the trade war. Don't go away. Welcome back. I'm Dana Milbank, and this is Impromptu. So Trump is not quite on his way to negotiating 90 trade deals in 90 days, but he is hinting that he may have one with India. Now, don't laugh at me for asking this, but is there any chance that Trump's cockamamie trade plan might actually work? And loads of countries will reduce tariffs on American goods, and even China will blink first and agree to more favorable terms, and everything will be happy? Or are we sort of inescapably plunging into a new era of escalating tariffs and barriers, or, as George W. Bush once called them, terriers and barriffs?
I would bet on the second, the more pessimistic scenario. I mean, I guess it's not impossible that a bunch of countries will come and try to cut some deals, and there are possibly win-win deals available for countries like India or Japan or whatnot that will also be good for them. But I think that the way that the Trump is proposing this whole war, which is a kind of like a win-lose proposition for everybody. So the U.S. wins, you lose, you cut off China as well because we don't want you to trade as much with China. You offer us a good deal and we offer you very little. I very much doubt that that kind of positioning is going to lead to a lot of deals. And by the way, he puts a lot of faith in the fact that the United States is a very, very large importer and hence is a very important market for a bunch of countries. But actually, China is a more important market than the United States for like Japan, Australia, Brazil, I believe India. Because implicitly in Trump's war, Trump does want countries to cut off China as well.
I think the answer to your question depends very much on what you mean by work. Like, does the deal work? What is his objective? And part of the problem is he has many objectives that are self-contradictory. Maybe he wants lower trade barriers in other countries, but he certainly doesn't want to reduce tariffs here because he's counting on the tax revenue from those tariffs to help him pay for his bigger tax cuts that are in the pipeline for later this year. So I think he just has no incentive to substantially reduce our tariffs. And to me, that would be the win-win scenario, is if you have lower trade barriers all around. I just don't think that's likely. He also seems to want to use this as leverage to bring back manufacturing to the United States for things like dolls and pencils and very generally lower value goods that will not bring good jobs, because given the price point of those products, either you have to pay people poverty wages in order to have them produce products that are still affordable to the American public, or you have to build them with robots, in which case they're not really producing that many jobs at all. And then the other piece of all of this is that we have proven such an unreliable negotiating partner that even if he does get some deal miraculously with India or any other country that someone like me might view as good, why would they agree to those terms? Like, what's the likelihood that he would just tear up the deal a few months later, as he did, in fact, with Canada and Mexico? You know, he negotiated a deal when he was president before, a real trade pact that Congress actually had to pass, and then tore it up. So I just think it's much harder, given that other countries do not have faith that we will keep our word, to get to a place of a sustainable trade deal that actually results in better outcomes.
Right. What does your crystal ball say will happen with China? Because that's obviously the most important factor here now. I mean, is there any chance that they blink? I mean, they don't have to worry about a domestic public opinion in the same way that he does. Do you see, I mean, they keep trying to pretend that they're, coming begging to negotiate something, but the facts don't seem to bear that out. What will happen with China?
This is going to hurt China. China exports $450 billion worth of stuff to the United States, and a 145% tariff really does look like a wall. But I think that Trump is miscalculating the balance of power and the balance of vulnerability, because I think the question that's going to end up mattering more is how many alternatives you have for the imports that you are now cutting off. So China is now faced with a demand crisis. It needs to find, say, a $450 billion worth of demand somewhere else. It could, for instance, stimulate domestic demand. And politically, this has been a problem in China. They've been recommending this to the Chinese for years and years, and they haven't really done it. But perhaps they bite the bullet, and it would be actually pretty good for them if they had, a more robust consumer economy. But the U.S. has, in my view, a much more complicated task. It has a supply crisis because it really relies on China for an enormous amount of things that it has no alternative sources of supply for. So, I mean, just take rare earth minerals. If you don't get them from China, you don't get them. Period. And they're critical. I mean, they're in our, Navy subs and Air Force jets and stuff. I mean, these things are very important. And there's a whole bunch of electronics and so on where there are no alternative sources of supply. So this is going to be a real problem for the U.S. And I think this allows China a lot more leeway in negotiating with, oh, really? You want your rare earth? Well, you call me, I mean, clearly, this is definitely going to hurt China. And China was already in a perilous economic situation. It was slowing. But I don't see the tilted balance of power in the favor of the U.S. that Trump seems to believe in.
Yeah. So, Catherine, what do you see the 145% tariffs? Is Trump just going to sort of, I don't know, declare victory and then retreat?
That's essentially what he did in his first term.
Yeah.
I mean, the tariffs didn't get to 145%. I think they topped out at something like 25%, if I remember correctly. But he did strike a quote unquote deal with China for China to buy more soybeans from the U.S. Big whoop. They had reduced their purchases of soybeans because of him and then resumed them when he declared victory. But then they ultimately didn't keep to the terms of the agreement, and everybody kind of moved on. So I think maybe there's some hope of some fig leaf here again.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think you have some more motivated China hawks this time around than we did last time. So maybe they want something more significant. But you sort of alluded to something earlier on in your initial question about the Chinese population's willingness or lack of say in being able to tolerate pain. And Chinese officials have actually talked about that in the past as being their sort of the reason why they have the upper hand here is that there's this long history of the Chinese people. The term in Chinese is eating bitterness.
Mm-hmm.
Just being able to nobly withstand pain and sacrifice in service of the greater good.
They can do with fewer dolls and pencils.
Yes, I mean they have, as Eduardo pointed out, they have a domestic consumption problem, and maybe that's cultural. It's also that they don't have any way of holding their leaders to account. So I think that will certainly help China in these negotiations, and to some extent, what Trump is doing by ticking off all of our allies is helping China.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like you saw China, South Korea, and Japan get together maybe a few weeks ago for their first economic dialogue in something like 5 years, motivated by Trump. Right? These countries historically do not like each other very much for reasons that go back to World War II and earlier. And Trump has brought them together. He's bringing people together just against the United States.
He has united the world.
Yes.
All right. So let's pivot a bit and talk about the big, beautiful bill, otherwise known as the budget resolution. Republicans in Congress are trying to pass this. It looks like they're having all kinds of setbacks in the House, fighting between the moderate factions and the conservative factions. This, includes extending Trump's tax cuts, even increasing them, the big government spending cuts, including on Medicaid. What's your sense of whether they're going to succeed at this? And if they don't, what does that mean for the larger economy? You guys got a read on that?
I think it's sort of similar with to what I was saying before about mutually contradicting objectives with Trump's trade wars. You see the same thing with these House budget negotiations. Either, they're in this case, they're different factions that are promoting things that conflict with each other. So everybody wants tax cuts, at least in the Republican conference. But some of them think that they should be paid for. Some of them think that they shouldn't be paid for. Some of them think that they should be paid for with Medicaid cuts. Some of them realize that they are dead men and women walking if they slash Medicaid. And others, there have been attempts to sort of just say, well, let's repeal the laws of arithmetic, and then it looks like we didn't actually increase deficits. There's like some very complicated jujitsu happening there. It looks like these things don't cost anything, and therefore we don't need to cut Medicaid. But then you still have to raise the debt limit, which plenty of Republicans have said is a no-go. So I think that they're sort of stuck in this knot right now, and I'm not really sure how they see their way out of it. But it's probably we're going to end up with something that adds a lot of red ink to our deficits and debts, despite the big talk about being fiscal hawks all of these years. And then that'll probably stimulate the economy in the short run and cause lots of problems in the long run. That's sort of my overview.
I mean, if Trump's whole talk about trade is insanely self-contradictory, I think the talk about the budget even beats the talk about trade in just how absurdly out of touch with reality it is.
Yeah.
From the very first things Trump has said about how he's going to fund the government by, say, tariffs instead of income taxes, it's just off by an order of magnitude. The Medicaid cuts are just like so politically infeasible, but absolutely critical to kind of sort of try to square the circle for them fiscally. So every kind of thing they say is just obviously no, that obviously is not a solution to the fiscal quandary we're in. I read some modeling where it found that that Trump's tariffs, even if he used the optimal tariff lever that raised the most revenue, he wouldn't get $1 trillion out of it. Now, our budget, the federal budget's more like $5 trillion. So, it's like, just no, it's just absolutely wrong.
And also, he wants to. He allegedly the tariffs are sometimes a negotiating tactic, and the tariffs are going to go
there's
away.
that too, right? the tariffs do 27 things, including the ponies and the rainbows. So it's. And I wonder, and here's a thought that I don't know if people have kind of factored into the thinking about our fiscal future. I mean, we already run a deficit of what, 6% of GDP? I mean, it's some insane number. And what's going to happen now that our borrowing costs are going to go up a bunch? I mean, you guys have seen that part of the reaction to Liberation Day and so forth was a huge drop in treasuries. And I've heard people think that this is going to cost us 1/4 to 0.5 percentage point in interest rates over the long term, over from now till forever on the federal debt. And now that is real money. So that's just going to make squaring this so much more difficult.
All right, so I think we all agree in the long term we're completely screwed. Let me just
maybe in the short term too.
Right, that's what I was going to ask. Before we wrap up here, let's just do the recession thermometer. How are we looking there?
Oh, we're getting it.
We're getting into a recession.
Yeah. We're getting recession. We're getting inflation. Powell's going to have a terrible, terrible job over the coming, year. I would guess that we get both. The uncertainty is going to give us the recession side, whereas I mean tariffs could lead to a future without necessarily persistent inflation. It could be a one-off rise in prices that then, if it's managed properly, it does not just persist into the future as inflation. Mm-hmm. But I think that given the impact on growth and how difficult this is going to be to calibrate for the Federal Reserve, the likelihood that we do get sustained inflation is high. And I clearly think that what you're looking about from consumer confidence, business confidence, the jittery financial markets and so forth, I do think that an economic contraction is also on the cards.
I think it has become much more likely in the last few months than had been the case when Trump took office. I don't know that it's a fait accompli yet. I still hold out hope that somebody gets through to Trump, maybe I'm sure this is naive, and they try to peel back some of the damage, but I'm increasingly pessimistic about that, particularly since Trump doesn't seem to have been chastened by market declines, and as we've been discussing, the markets seem to be buying whatever BS he's selling lately and putting less pressure on him by recovering. He's hearing behind closed doors from CEOs about the dire consequences of everything that he's doing, both for prices and for growth. It doesn't seem to be getting through to him, but maybe someone will. I don't know. I don't want to say we're doomed to a downturn, but I do think a downturn is much more likely than it was.
We're doomed to a downturn unless there's a change in course.
Yeah.
Is there a Trump whisperer out there that can, dude, let's not tank the world? I mean, is there somebody that can play this role?
I don't know. It depends who's buying crypto. Trump coin.
Good point. And there's a big gala coming up at the White House for those who enrich Trump's coffers the most. All right. Well, I'm going to follow Eduardo's advice and go upstairs and put a pillow over my head. But with that, let's wrap this up. Thank you both for making me a little bit smarter today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Dana.
Thank you. Take it easy.
This episode was produced by Hadley Robinson, edited by Damir Marusic, and mixed by Emma Munger. Special thanks to Millie Mitra and Deirdre Byrne. Thanks for listening to Impromptu. Please let us know how these tariffs are impacting you. Send us an email to impromptu@washpost.com. And if you're enjoying the show, please rate us and leave us a glowing review on your favorite podcast app. Talk to you next week.